Now let's get back to the flow. Going back to Power Virtual Agent, you can click on Create an Action, and this would give you a prompt to create a flow. So again, log in with your Dynamics credentials. Once you're logged in, you'll be navigated to this screen with everything pre-populated. So this is basically a HTTP request hook, which you will be passing in a JSON body, and accepting the JSON body, we can perform certain operations. The URL will be generated post saving the flow, and this URL can be accessed from public using a post call. But in our case, the Power Virtual Agent will be accessing it from within the services. So you can get started by configuring how your JSON will appear. So based on the data that you provide here, it generates the JSON format that needs to be sent. So in our case, that would be the query that we would receive from the user. So as you can see, the request body has been generated. And the next step would be to delete these existing steps, as we would be calling Lewis in order to identify the intent and entity details. So here you can get started by typing in Lewis. If you're using your Dynamics 365 account, you should have access to all the premium connectors. Get started by clicking on Get Predictions. Here you will require a connection name. You can name it as you please. The next thing would be to pass in the API key. So the API key is where we get after we have published the Lewis app. So copy that API key, paste it here. So this basically gives Flow access to the Lewis app. Select the application you built. So you can see the knowledge agent being populated here. The next thing would be to pass in the utterance text. The utterance text would be accessible via the query variable that is accessed from the HTTP post that's sent. You can trim the body of the utterance to remove unnecessary spaces. So let me just pass in the query. And once this is done, this connector would basically be returning all the details that it is collected from Lewis. So we need to capture this using a variable. So you can initialize a variable. This variable will basically be holding the details of the product. That is the product that is identified from within the query. So this can be of type string. Oh, pardon me. Looks like we'll have to identify the intent first. So let's rename the variable as intent and basically select the highest scoring intent. So this will be the name of the highest scoring intent. So this once this variable is configured, the next thing would be to identify the product. For this, you will have to again utilize Lewis. Here we will be utilizing this action called get entity by type. What this basically does is it takes in the result that has been given by the prediction on top, and it tries to identify a particular product, the particular entity details that we are trying to identify. So in our case, we are trying to identify the product. So I have selected the product as the entity, desired entity, and we need to pass in the Lewis prediction. So this action would basically give us a result of the product that it has identified from the utterance text. This again needs to be captured in a variable. So calling the variable product, and this would basically hold the entity value, which is the product that it has identified. And the last step would be to create the response body. Again, you can use the insert sample JSON payload to generate the response body. And in our case, we would be passing back the intent and we would be passing back the product details. So I'm just typing in some value here to generate the JSON payload. So once you have the request body ready, you just have to format the body. You can copy paste it from your response body. And here you will be selecting the variable that you want to pass in as your response. Ensure that the JSON format is correct. And then you can click on save. So once the flow is saved, you would probably like to rename the flow into something that makes sense. So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm saving it again. So your flow is basically ready, but this flow will not be accessible from within the Power Virtual Agent as it is not part of a solution. So in order to access it part of the Power Virtual Agent, you will have to move the flow into a solution. So let me just create a solution. Since this is a trial and since I don't have any solution at hand, an unmanaged solution. So I'm just giving in the default publisher. And yeah, let me open this solution. And you can add an existing flow. And you will have to select from outside the solution as you created it outside it. And then this basically adds the flow into your solution. This is basically the same solution that you see in Dynamics. This is just a new interface. So now you will be able to access the flow.